Today we really have a distinct honor and pleasure of having Timothy Shafford, who is sort of a little Nebraska treasure, with us this afternoon. Timothy is a UNL lecturer. He's also a very widely published author and busy working on some more books for us to read, which I've enjoyed the ones you've done so far very much. Very, very, very good. He's also the director of the UNL Summer Writing Workshop, and so he's gotten quite a lot of experience in writing, in reading other people's work, and talking about the art of writing, the work of writing, and he's very good at sharing his thoughts with everyone. So today, without any further ado, I will introduce Timothy Shafford, and it's all yours.
All right. Thank you so much. I'm going to talk a little bit about, this notion, when Carol first approached me about talking, this notion of books about books caught my attention, primarily because I'm writing right now a book in which a book figures prominently. I think, Carol, you were at the session, I read a little bit from it, so I'm going to read a little bit from that later and talk a little bit more about that as well. I'd hoped to be a little further along by now in my research in the Trans-Mississippi Exposition of Omaha, but I do have some samples of writing from that as well. But she was just showing me an egg with an image saved from the exposition from time to time. You still see them. I think they're called a colophon. And basically it's a paragraph or two that tells you about the history, generally, of the typeface that the printer used in setting the copy, the text of the book. Unfortunately, I've never had a note about the type at the end of any of my books, but I'd love to someday, although I don't know why, because it doesn't assist with the interpretation of the book or affect the book necessarily when you're reading of it, and it's sort of a strange note to end a book on, this note about the type. But I think the reason it's attractive to me is because of its antiquity and because of how it suggests the physicality of a book, which I think most first-time authors, when their first book comes out, they can speak to the mesmerizing effect of having that artifact, that book, that first copy of the book in their hands. I know I found myself studying, the thread in the binding and the grain of the paper, and my initials were debossed on the front, and on the spine it was embossed, I think. And so you find yourself, and that of course is all hidden by the paper jacket that most people won't even remove. But it's fascinating to me, and I think it also speaks to the fact of the book as a culturally accepted object of fetish. It's something that we can hoard without looking like hoarders. But if you kept tea tins just because you liked the tea in them and filled your kitchen with tea tins, people would probably think you're a sociopath. But the books, for some reason, we allow ourselves to pile up on shelves and to display, and for reasons that are not necessarily practical. Obviously, you can return to your books and read them again and again, but typically we don't return to them so often that we can't just go to the library and pick up the edition when we want to see it again. And I think that's somewhat at issue when we're talking about electronic books as well. The people who tend to get riled up about the Kindle and the Sony reader and the whole ebook concept tend to not only don't they want it for themselves, but they don't want anybody else to read books electronically either. And so I think that really speaks to the power of the physical book and the format of the book as a cultural relic, as we see certainly in Geraldine Brooks's book. So I think I'm just going to read just a paragraph from People in the Book, fairly early It's actually page 15 of my edition here, where she's examining the book for the first time. The illuminations were beautiful, but I didn't allow myself to look at them as art. Not yet. First, I had to understand them as chemicals. There was yellow, made of saffron. That beautiful autumn flower, Crocus sativus Linnaeus, each with just 3 tiny, precious stigmas, had been a prized luxury then and remained one still. Even if we now know that the rich color comes from a keratin, protein, with a molecular structure of 44 carbon, 64 hydrogen, and 24 oxygen, we still haven't synthesized a substitute as complex and as beautiful. There was malachite green and red, the intense red known as worm scarlet, tolah shani in Hebrew, extracted from tree-dwelling insects, crushed up and boiled in lye. Later, when alchemists learned how to make a similar red from sulfur and mercury, they still named the color little worm, vermiculum. Some things don't change. We call it vermilion even today. And as Grady knows, in my class that I'm teaching this semester, the university literature course, we're looking specifically at the book as a device, as a kind of a mechanism, really, and how it incorporates not just the text, not just the story, but to look at the other aspects of the book. I mean, it speaks to design principles. It speaks to the vagaries of the marketplace, and I think that's something that ultimately gets lost if we do switch to an all-electronic culture in terms of interpreting texts, because, as is demonstrated in this book, even just the loss of the cover of the Haggadah results in just reams and reams of history lost. So we spent some time, much to my students' chagrin, on To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf, which is, even though she's not calling attention to the typeface or the grain of the paper or the cover of the book, she's nonetheless asking us to read that book differently than we've read any other book before. She even wanted to call it something different than a novel. It was an exercise and a meditation in learning how to read it as we're reading it, and so that the book itself is speaking to its themes and its characters are serving the themes of the book in a way that fits the structure of the book. The sentences go on and on and on. The word choice is complex. The level of detail, the time element, the chronology she's fussing with and moving all about, so you don't even know if the book's moving forward or backward at any given moment most of the time. So, but that's one element that we're examining in that class in terms of an author's invention, in terms of not just looking at what the story is, but how the story is told. But later in the semester, we're looking at a book called The Unfortunates by B.S. Johnson. It was written in the 1960s and comes in a box. And so it comes, each chapter is separate. And so each reader, depending on how they pull that chapter out of the box, will have a different experience with that novel. And that's also a book that, as with To the Lighthouse, examines the passing of time and the time that we spend on the moments of our lives and that kind of elasticity of human experience. And so that these authors aren't just telling us about it, but allowing us to experience it by nature of the format of the books and the format of the presentation.